The blizzard had come out of nowhere, turning the mountain pass into a frozen hell, and Felicity Kane knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die here. The snow whipped around her in blinding sheets as she stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other reaching blindly for anything solid to hold on to. Her worn boots slipped on ice she could not see, and her thin coat offered no protection against the savage wind that howled through the peaks like a living thing determined to devour her whole. She had been traveling for 3 days since fleeing the mining camp where Thomas had left her, pregnant and penniless. When he discovered the gold claim was worthless and decided a woman with child was too much burden to carry into his next venture. The year was 1887, and women alone in the Arizona Territory had few options and even fewer friends. Felicity had sold everything she owned except the clothes on her back to buy passage on a wagon train heading south to warmer country, but the wagon master had refused to wait when she fell ill at the last stop. He had left her at a trading post in the mountains with nothing but harsh words about women who got themselves into trouble. The trading post keeper had been kinder. He gave her directions to Castle Dome, a small town in the valley below where he said a doctor lived and where honest work might be found. But he had warned her about the weather, told her to wait for the pass to clear. Felicity had not listened. Her baby was due within weeks, and she could not afford to wait. The few coins she had left would barely buy food for the journey, and the trading post keeper had made it clear she could not stay without paying. Now she was paying for her impatience with her life. The wind knocked her sideways, and Felicity fell to her knees in a snowdrift that came up to her chest. She tried to stand, but her legs would not obey. The cold had worked its way deep into her bones, turning her muscles to stone. She could no longer feel her feet or her hands. Even the baby had stopped moving, and that terrified her more than her own approaching death. "Please," she whispered into the storm, though she did not know who she was begging. She had given up on God when Thomas left her. She had given up on people when the wagon master drove away, but something in her still wanted to fight, still wanted to live, still wanted to see her baby draw breath in this world even if she could not be there to raise it. The snow began to bury her, piling up around her shoulders, covering her head. She felt herself sliding down into darkness, felt the cold becoming strangely warm, felt everything slipping away. Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders, lifting her up out of the snow. Yates Vaughn had been tracking the wounded elk for 2 hours when he saw the dark shape half buried in the snowdrift. At first he thought it was a fallen log or a boulder, but something made him ride closer, some instinct honed by 30 years of living in wild country. When he realized it was a woman, he was off his horse before conscious thought caught up with his body. She was barely breathing, her lips blue with cold, her skin like ice beneath his gloved hands. He pulled her up out of the snow, and his eyes went wide when he saw how pregnant she was. 8 months at least, maybe more. What in hell was a woman in her condition doing alone in a mountain blizzard? There was no time for questions. Yates wrapped her in his heavy coat and lifted her onto his horse, climbing up behind her to hold her steady against his chest. The elk was forgotten. His cabin was only a mile away, but in this storm it might as well have been 10. He urged his horse forward, tucking the woman's head beneath his chin to shield her face from the wind. His cabin sat in a small clearing protected by tall pines, invisible until you were nearly on top of it. Smoke still rose from the chimney, promising warmth inside. Yates had left that morning expecting to be gone only a few hours, never imagining he would return with a dying woman in his arms. He kicked the door open and carried her straight to the fireplace, laying her down on the bearskin rug as close to the flames as he dared. Her clothes were soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew he had to get them off her before the cold killed her. He worked quickly, stripping away her coat, her dress, her undergarments, trying not to think about impropriety when her life hung in the balance. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and then added his spare clothes, tucking them around her body to trap what little heat remained. Her breathing was so shallow he had to put his ear against her mouth to hear it. Her heartbeat fluttered beneath his fingers when he checked her pulse, weak and irregular. Yates had seen men die from exposure before, had seen how the cold stole life by degrees until there was nothing left to save. But he had also seen men come back from the edge when someone refused to give up on them. He heated water on the stove and brought it back in a basin, using cloths to warm her hands and feet, rubbing gently to restore circulation without causing damage. He had learned this from a Navajo woman years ago when he had nearly frozen to death himself after falling through ice. Slow and steady, she had told him. Bring them back to life gradually, or you will lose them to the shock. The woman stirred after an hour, making a small sound of distress. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Yates lifted her head and got a few drops of warm broth between her lips, relieved when she swallowed reflexively. He kept at it, patient and persistent, until she had taken nearly half a cup. As color began to return to her face, he allowed himself to really look at her. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair that hung in tangled waves past her shoulders. Even unconscious and half-dead, she was lovely, with fine features and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of strength beneath the fragility. His eyes went to her belly, enormous beneath the blankets, and he wondered again what circumstances had brought her to this place. No wedding ring, he noted. No luggage, no supplies, nothing but the clothes he had stripped off her and left drying by the fire. Whatever her story was, it was not a happy one. Night fell, and still she did not fully wake. Yates sat beside her, feeding the fire, checking her pulse, watching for any sign of improvement or decline. He should have been exhausted, but adrenaline kept him alert. Somewhere around midnight, he dozed off, sitting against the wall, only to jerk awake when she cried out. Her eyes were open, wild with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, but he gently pressed her back down. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You are safe. You were caught in the storm, but I found you. You are in my cabin now." She stared at him, breathing hard, one hand moving instinctively to her belly. "The baby," she gasped. "Is the baby—" "I do not know," Yates admitted, "but you are both alive, and that is what matters right now. You need to rest, get your strength back." "I cannot," she said, trying again to rise. "I have to get to Castle Dome. I have to find the doctor. The baby is coming soon, and I need—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale, her hand clutching her stomach. Yates saw the wetness spreading across the blankets, and his heart sank. "I think the baby is coming now," he said quietly. Felicity stared at him in horror. "No. It is too soon. I have at least 2 more weeks, maybe 3. It cannot be coming now." But her body had other ideas. Another contraction seized her stronger than the first, and she cried out despite her determination to stay quiet. Yates had delivered foals and calves, and even helped birth a baby once when he was younger and traveling with a wagon train, but this was different. This woman was alone, traumatized, half frozen, and the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to focus her attention, trying to keep her from panicking. "Felicity," she gasped between contractions. "Felicity Kane." "I am Yates Vaughn. I know you are scared, Felicity, but I need you to trust me. I have done this before, not often, but enough to know what to do. Can you trust me?" She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much betrayal to trust easily, but desperation won out over suspicion. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts," she whispered. "Oh God, it hurts so much." "I know," Yates said, and his voice was so gentle it surprised him. He was not a gentleman by nature, had lived too long alone in wild places to remember much about tenderness, but something about this woman, this moment, brought it out of him. He prepared as best he could, boiling water, finding clean cloths, clearing space near the fire where the light was good. Felicity labored through the night, her cries echoing in the small cabin, and Yates stayed with her every moment. He held her hand when the pain was too much to bear alone. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths when the fever came. He spoke to her in that low, calm voice, telling her she was strong, telling her she could do this, telling her the baby would be here soon. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came, sliding into Yates's waiting hands in a rush of blood and fluid. For one terrible moment the child did not breathe, did not move, and Yates felt his stomach drop. But then he remembered what the old Navajo woman had taught him, and he turned the baby upside down and rubbed its back firmly, clearing the airway. The baby gasped, coughed, and then let out a wail that filled the cabin with sound and life and hope. Yates laughed, actually laughed, relief flooding through him so powerfully it made him dizzy. He wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and placed it on Felicity's chest. "A boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have a son, Felicity." She stared down at the tiny red-faced creature with wonder, her hands coming up to cradle him against her heart. Tears poured down her face, but she was smiling, actually smiling, and it transformed her. She was not just lovely anymore. She was radiant. "Hello," she whispered to her son. "Hello, my beautiful boy. I am your mama. I am right here." The baby stopped crying at the sound of her voice, his unfocused eyes turning toward her face. One tiny hand escaped the cloth and waved in the air. Felicity caught it with her finger, and the baby gripped tight, holding on with surprising strength. Yates tended to the rest of it, cutting the cord, delivering the afterbirth, cleaning up as much as he could. He had seen many births before, but never one that felt like this. Never one that made his chest tight and his throat close up with feelings he could not name. When it was done, he helped Felicity into his bed, settling her and the baby beneath fresh blankets. She was exhausted, barely able to keep her eyes open, but she would not let go of her son. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Yates. "You saved our lives, both of us. I do not know how to repay such a debt." "No debt," Yates said gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Any man would have done the same." "That is not true," Felicity said quietly, "and we both know it." She fell asleep before he could respond. The baby nestled safely in her arms. Yates stood watching them for a long moment. This woman and child who had stumbled into his life like a miracle in the snow. He had lived alone for 5 years, ever since his wife died of fever, and he could no longer bear to stay in the town where they had built their life together. He had thought he wanted solitude, thought he needed distance from people and their complications. But looking at Felicity and her baby, he felt something shift inside him, some wall beginning to crack. The blizzard raged outside for 2 more days, trapping them all in the cabin. Yates hunted game close to home and kept the fire burning. Felicity recovered her strength slowly, eating the food he prepared, drinking the herb tea he brewed to help with healing. The baby nursed well and slept often, waking only to eat and then drifting back into infant dreams. During the long hours while Felicity slept, Yates found himself watching over them both. This unexpected family that had appeared in his life. He mended Felicity's torn dress and washed her other clothes. He carved a small wooden rattle for the baby, his hands moving automatically through a skill he had nearly forgotten. He had made toys for his own child once before the fever took his wife and their unborn baby both, leaving him alone in a world that suddenly held no meaning. On the 3rd day, the storm broke, leaving the world outside buried in snow but bright with sunshine. Felicity was sitting up in bed, the baby in her arms, when Yates brought her breakfast. "I need to tell you the truth," she said without preamble, "about how I came to be in that storm. You deserve to know what kind of woman you saved." Yates sat down in the chair beside the bed, waiting. Felicity took a deep breath and began to speak. She told him about Thomas, the miner who had promised her marriage and a future, who had gotten her pregnant, and then abandoned her when his luck ran out. She told him about the wagon master who left her behind, about the trading post keeper's warnings she had ignored. She told him about her family back in Missouri, respectable people who had disowned her when they learned about the baby, who had told her she was dead to them and to never come back. She told him everything, her voice steady but her eyes filled with shame. "I have nothing," she finished. No money, no family, no husband, just my son and the clothes you saved from the snow. I understand if you want us to leave as soon as the roads are clear. I understand if you think poorly of me. Most people do. Yates was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what she had said, thinking about the courage it must have taken to speak such truths to a stranger. When he finally responded, his voice was thoughtful rather than judgmental. I think you were dealt a bad hand by a bad man, and you played it the best way you knew how, he said. I think you walked through a blizzard to save your son's life, and that makes you braver than most men I have known. I think the people who turned their backs on you are fools who do not deserve you. Felicity stared at him, surprise and something else flickering across her face. You do not think I am ruined? Shameful? I think shame belongs to the man who abandoned his responsibilities, not to the woman who kept hers, Yates said firmly. And I think you and your son are welcome to stay here as long as you need. The road to Castle Dome is buried under 6 feet of snow and will not be passable for weeks. Even when it clears, winter in the mountains is not safe for traveling with an infant. You can stay until spring if you want. Longer, if it suits you. I cannot impose on you for months, Felicity protested. You have already done so much. I cannot take advantage of your kindness. It is not kindness, Yates said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. It is practical. You need a place to recover and care for your baby. I have a place. It makes sense. What do you get out of it? Felicity asked, and there was a wariness in her voice that spoke of too many men wanting too much. Company, Yates said honestly. I have been alone a long time. Too long, maybe. It would be nice to have someone to talk to besides my horse. Felicity studied his face, looking for lies or hidden motives. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Until spring, then. And I will help however I can. I can cook and clean and mend. I can earn my keep. Fair enough, Yates agreed, though he would have let her stay even without the offer. The baby made a small sound, and Felicity looked down at him with such love it made Yates's chest ache. I need to give him a name, she said softly. I have been trying to think of the right one. Something strong. Something that means he is wanted and loved no matter what anyone else thinks. What about Frank? Yates suggested. It was my father's name. He was a good man, honest and hardworking. He would have been honored to have a child named for him. Frank, Felicity repeated, testing the sound. She smiled. Frank Kane. Yes, I like that. Thank you, Yates. It was the first time she had used his given name, and he found he liked the sound of it in her voice. The days settled into a routine. Yates tended to the animals and hunted for food, while Felicity cared for Frank and managed the household. She was a good cook, better than Yates by a long stretch, and she could make even his simple provisions taste like something special. She sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood, and the cabin that had been silent for so long filled with music and life. Frank grew stronger each day, his cries becoming more vigorous, his grip on Felicity's finger more sure. Yates found himself drawn to the baby in ways he had not expected, offering to hold him when Felicity needed to rest, walking him around the cabin when he fussed, talking to him in a low voice about nothing in particular. The baby seemed to like him, settling quickly in his arms, staring up at his face with serious dark eyes that saw everything and understood nothing. Felicity watched these interactions with an expression Yates could not quite read. Sometimes she seemed pleased, even grateful. Other times she looked sad, almost wistful, as though she were thinking about things that might have been but were not. One evening, about 2 weeks after Frank's birth, they were sitting by the fire after supper when Felicity suddenly spoke into the comfortable silence. Tell me about your wife. Yates looked up sharply, surprised. He had not mentioned Sarah, had not spoken her name aloud in years. How did you know I had a wife? You have a woman's apron hanging on a peg in the corner, Felicity said gently, and there are curtains on the windows that no bachelor would have made himself. And sometimes when you look at Frank, you get this expression like you are remembering something painful. Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. He had spent 5 years refusing to talk about Sarah, refusing to remember, refusing to feel. But something about Felicity's direct honesty made him want to answer. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally. "We met in Kansas, married young. Too young, probably, but we thought we knew everything. We came west together looking for a fresh start, settled in a town about 50 miles from here. She got pregnant 3 years into our marriage. We were so happy. I built a cradle and painted the nursery. Sarah made clothes and blankets. We picked out names." He stopped, swallowing hard. Felicity waited, patient and silent. "She got a fever in her 8th month," Yates continued, his voice rough. "The doctor did everything he could, but it was too strong. She died, and the baby died with her. I buried them together under a cottonwood tree. After that, I could not stay in that town anymore. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. So I came here, built this cabin where no one could find me. I have been here 5 years." "I am sorry," Felicity said quietly. "That is a terrible loss to carry." "I thought I wanted to be alone with it," Yates admitted. "Thought I would be angry if anyone tried to make me feel differently. But when you and Frank came, when I helped bring him into the world, something changed. I started remembering what it felt like to hope for things, to care about things. I'm not sure how I feel about that." "Are you sorry we came?" Felicity asked. "No," Yates said immediately, and he realized it was completely true. "No, I'm not sorry. You and Frank, you made this place feel like a home again. I did not realize how much I missed that until I had it back." Felicity was looking at him with an expression he could not decipher, her eyes bright in the firelight. "I am not sorry either," she said softly. "Even though I should be, even though I barely know you. But you have been kinder to me than anyone in my life, and I do not think I will ever be able to thank you enough." "You do not need to thank me," Yates said. "Having you here is thanks enough." They looked at each other across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, some recognition that this arrangement was becoming more than just practical necessity. Yates felt his heart start to beat faster, felt old feelings stirring that he had thought died with Sarah. It scared him, but it also felt right in a way he could not explain. Winter deepened, and the world outside became a frozen landscape of white and gray. Inside the cabin, though, warmth and life continued to grow. Frank thrived, getting bigger and stronger, starting to focus his eyes and follow movement. Felicity bloomed in the safety and security of Yates's home, her face losing its gaunt, desperate look, her smiles coming more easily. Yates found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire and talk. Felicity was smart and funny when she let herself be, with opinions about books and politics that surprised him. She had been educated before her fall from grace, had dreamed of becoming a teacher before circumstances derailed her plans. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her 4 sisters and 2 brothers, about parents who valued respectability above love. In turn, Yates told her about his own childhood on a cattle ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his father who taught him to track and hunt and survive in wild country. He told her about Sarah, too, more and more, as the weeks passed, finding that speaking her name hurt less when Felicity listened with such compassion. One night in late December, Yates went outside to check on the animals and came back to find Felicity crying quietly while she rocked Frank to sleep. He hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to intrude, but she saw him and tried to wipe her tears away. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick. "I do not know what is wrong with me. I should be happy. Frank is healthy and we are safe and warm. But sometimes I just feel so sad and I do not know why." Yates crossed the room and sat down beside her, his large frame making the rocking chair creak. "My mother used to say that women sometimes get melancholy after having a baby," he said gently, "that it is normal and it passes. Maybe that is what you're feeling." "Maybe," Felicity agreed, but she sounded uncertain. "Or maybe I'm just thinking about how everything has changed." 6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life would be. I thought Thomas loved me and we would get married and have a family. I thought I understood how the world worked, but I was wrong about all of it. And now I do not know what happens next. Come spring, Frank and I have to leave here and figure out how to survive, and I have no idea how to do that. It terrifies me. You do not have to leave in spring, Yates said quietly. I told you, you can stay as long as you want. I cannot live off your charity forever, Felicity said. It is not right. What if it was not charity? Yates asked, the words coming out before he had time to think about them. What if you stayed because you wanted to, because this was your home too? Felicity turned to look at him, her eyes wide. What are you saying? Yates took a deep breath, committing himself to the path he had started down. I am saying I care about you, Felicity, you and Frank both. I care about you in a way I did not think I could care about anyone ever again. I know it is too soon. I know you have been hurt, and you have every reason not to trust men. But I want you to stay, not as a guest, but as something more, as my partner. My wife, if you would consider it. Felicity stared at him, her mouth open in shock. Yates, I do not know what to say. You barely know me. I know enough, Yates said firmly. I know you are brave and strong, and you love your son more than anything. I know you make me laugh and make me think and make me want to be a better man. I know that when I imagine my future now, you are in it. Both of you are in it. But you loved your wife, Felicity said, tears streaming down her face again. How can you want to replace her so quickly? I am not trying to replace Sarah, Yates said gently. She will always be a part of me, and I will always miss her. But she has been gone 5 years, and I have been alone long enough. She would not want me to spend the rest of my life grieving. She would want me to be happy. And you make me happy, Felicity. You and Frank make me happier than I have been since the day she died. I am not looking for a man to rescue me, Felicity said, her voice fierce despite the tears. I do not want to be some charity case you take pity on. I want to be valued for myself, not just because I am convenient. You think this is convenience? Yates asked, and there was heat in his voice now. You think it is easy for me to open my heart again after I spent 5 years shutting everyone out? You think I make this offer lightly? I am asking you to marry me because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want to see is your face. Because when Frank laughs, it makes my whole chest feel warm and full. Because for the first time since Sarah died, I want tomorrow to come instead of dreading it. Felicity was crying in earnest now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Yates carefully took Frank from her arms and put the sleeping baby in his cradle, then pulled Felicity into his arms and held her while she wept. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt, and he stroked her hair and murmured wordless comfort until the storm passed. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and swollen, but her eyes were clearer. I care about you too, she admitted in a whisper. I have been trying not to because it seemed wrong. I have Frank, and his father abandoned us, and I should be focused only on my son. But I think about you all the time. I watch you with Frank, and my heart does this thing where it feels too big for my chest. When you come back from hunting, I realize I have been holding my breath until I hear your footsteps. I am falling in love with you, Yates. And it scares me so much because the last time I trusted a man, I ended up alone and pregnant in a snowstorm. I am not Thomas, Yates said firmly. I will never leave you. I will never turn my back on you or Frank. I am asking you to marry me because I want to make a life with you, not because I am looking for an easy way out. Can you trust me enough to try? Felicity searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she nodded slowly, a small smile breaking through her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Yates felt something explode inside him, joy and relief and love all mixed together. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. gentle at first and then deeper when she kissed him back. It was nothing like kissing Sarah had been, but it was good in its own way, a promise of new beginnings rather than an echo of the past. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates pressed his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "As soon as the pass clears enough for travel, we will go to Castle Dome and find a preacher. I want you to be my wife in every way that matters." "What if people judge us?" Felicity asked. "What if they say terrible things about Frank and me?" "Then we will not stay in Castle Dome," Yates said simply. "We will build our life here where it is just us. Or we will move somewhere no one knows us and start fresh. I do not care what strangers think. I only care about you and Frank and the family we are making together." Felicity smiled, really smiled, and it was like the sun coming out after weeks of gray skies. "I love you," she said. And this time there was no fear in her voice, only certainty. "I love you, Yates Vaughn." "I love you too," Yates said, and the words felt right in his mouth, felt true in a way that warmed him from the inside out. They sat together for a long time, holding each other while Frank slept peacefully in his cradle, and the fire crackled in the hearth, and the winter wind howled outside. Yates thought about the strange path that had brought them to this moment, the series of accidents and choices that had led Felicity into that blizzard and him into the mountains at exactly the right time to find her. Some people might call it luck. Others might call it fate. Yates did not care what name you gave it. He was just grateful it had happened. The pass began to clear in mid-January, enough that Yates felt safe making the trip down to Castle Dome. He saddled his horse and helped Felicity climb up, then handed Frank up to her. The baby was bundled in so many blankets he looked like a small, round bundle, only his face peeking out. He did not cry during the journey, just stared around at the white world with solemn curiosity. Castle Dome was a small mining town, rough and rowdy, populated mostly by men looking for silver and willing to do almost anything to find it. Yates kept Felicity and Frank close as they rode down the main street, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them. Let people talk. It did not matter. They found the preacher at a small whitewashed church at the edge of town. Reverend Michaels was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put Felicity at ease. He asked no questions about Frank's father or why they were marrying in such haste, just agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Yates bought Felicity a new dress from the general store, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar and a gold ring that had belonged to a miner's widow. They were married in the little church with only Reverend Michaels and his wife as witnesses, speaking vows that promised love and loyalty until death parted them. When Yates kissed his bride, Frank made a small sound of protest from Mrs. Michaels's arms, making everyone laugh. They spent one night in Castle Dome's only hotel, a luxury that felt strange after months in the cabin. Felicity was nervous about the marriage bed, Yates could tell, so he took things slow, patient, and gentle until she relaxed into his touch. Loving her was different than loving Sarah had been, but it was no less real, no less meaningful. Afterward, she fell asleep in his arms, Frank in his cradle beside the bed, and Yates lay awake feeling like the luckiest man in the world. They returned to the cabin the next morning as husband and wife, beginning their life together in earnest. The rest of winter passed in a haze of contentment. Yates had never imagined he could be this happy again, but Felicity proved him wrong every single day. She filled the cabin with warmth and laughter, making it feel like the home he had lost years ago. Frank continued to thrive, growing plumper and more alert. He started smiling in late February, great toothless grins that lit up his whole face. The first time he smiled at Yates, the big cowboy felt his throat close up with emotion. This was not his child by blood, but it did not matter. In every way that counted, Frank was his son. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting in increments, revealing brown grass and budding trees. Yates taught Felicity to fish in the stream that ran past the cabin, and they spent long afternoons on the bank while Frank napped in a basket beside them. They talked about their plans for the future, about whether to stay in the mountains or move closer to town, about how many more children they wanted. "I want Frank to have siblings," Felicity said one warm April day. "I do not want him to be lonely the way I was sometimes growing up." "How many were you thinking?" Yates asked, amused by the determination in her voice. "At least 3 or 4 more," Felicity said firmly. "Maybe 5. I want a big family full of noise and chaos and love." "5 children," Yates repeated, pretending to be overwhelmed. "You realize that is a lot of mouths to feed?" "You are a good provider," Felicity said, smiling at him. "And I am not afraid of hard work. We will manage." Yates pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Whatever you want, my love. I will give you as many babies as you can handle." Felicity turned in his arms to look up at him. "Do you mean that? You really want more children?" "I really do," Yates said honestly. "I missed out on having a family with Sarah. Getting a second chance with you feels like a gift I do not deserve but am grateful for anyway." "You deserve every good thing," Felicity said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Vaughn, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They made love that afternoon while Frank napped, slow and tender in the spring sunshine. Afterward, lying tangled together in the grass, Yates felt more at peace than he could ever remember being. His old life was gone, but this new life was better in ways he could not have imagined. In May, Felicity discovered she was pregnant again. She was nervous about telling Yates, worried he would think it was too soon, but he swept her into his arms and spun her around until she was laughing and breathless. "Another baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have another baby." "Are you happy?" Felicity asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am more than happy," Yates said, setting her down carefully. "I am overjoyed. You have given me everything I thought I lost forever, a wife, a family, a reason to wake up in the morning. How could I be anything but happy?" This pregnancy was easier than her first had been. Felicity was healthy and well-fed, with a husband who doted on her and made sure she rested when she needed to. Frank was walking by then, toddling around the cabin and getting into everything, keeping both parents constantly busy and entertained. In late summer, Yates made the decision to move them closer to Castle Dome. The cabin had served its purpose as a refuge, but with a growing family, they needed access to town, to a doctor, to other people. He bought a piece of land just outside Castle Dome and built a proper house, larger than the cabin with room for their expanding family. They moved in September, settling into their new home with Frank and their belongings. The neighbors were curious but mostly kind, accepting the story that Yates was Frank's father without too many questions. Felicity made friends with some of the other women in town, finding community she had not realized she missed. Their daughter was born in January 1889 on a night when snow fell soft and quiet outside their windows. The birth was easier this time, with the town doctor in attendance and Yates holding Felicity's hand through the whole thing. When the baby girl arrived, red-faced and squalling, Felicity named her Sarah without asking Yates first. He cried when he heard the name, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You do not have to do that for me." "I am not doing it for you," Felicity said gently. "I am doing it because Sarah is part of our family too. She will always be part of your story and therefore part of ours. I want to honor her memory by giving our daughter her name." Yates kissed his wife deeply, then his newborn daughter, overwhelmed by the depth of love he felt for both of them. Frank toddled over to see his new sister, poking her with one chubby finger and pronouncing her baby with great authority. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. Yates worked as a ranch hand for one of the larger spreads outside town, earning steady money to support his growing family. Felicity kept house and raised the children, and sometimes took in sewing to add a little extra to their funds. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough. And more importantly, they had each other. Frank grew into a curious, energetic little boy who followed Yates everywhere and asked endless questions about horses and cattle and how things worked. Yates taught him to ride before his 4th birthday, patiently holding the boy steady in the saddle until he found his balance. Watching his son's face light up with pride when he rode by himself for the first time was one of the highlights of Yates's life. Sarah was a quieter child, more thoughtful, with her father's serious eyes and her mother's dark hair. She adored her big brother and toddled after him everywhere, trying to keep up with his adventures. The two children filled the house with noise and laughter and occasional tears, and Yates and Felicity would not have had it any other way. In 1890, Felicity became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. Yates worried constantly, remembering how his first wife had died, but the doctor assured him that Felicity was strong and healthy and would be fine. The baby was born in late autumn, another boy they named James. He came out screaming and did not stop for what felt like weeks, a colicky baby who kept everyone awake at night. But Yates walked the floors with him just like he had with Frank, patient and steady. And eventually James settled down into a sweet-tempered child who smiled at everyone. By 1892, they had 4 children. Thomas was born that spring, named after Felicity's favorite brother rather than Frank's biological father, who was never spoken of and would never be a part of their lives. Mary came the following year, a tiny baby who made no sound when she was born and scared everyone until she finally let out a wail that rattled the windows. Yates and Felicity's house was full to bursting with children and chaos and love. Money was tight sometimes, and there were days when they were both exhausted beyond measure, but they were happy. They had built something real together, something that would last. Frank grew into a responsible young man who helped his father with work and looked after his younger siblings with a seriousness beyond his years. He knew Yates was not his father by blood, but it had never mattered to either of them. Yates was the only father he had ever known, and Frank loved him with the fierce loyalty of a son who understood what a gift he had been given. One night when Frank was 14, he asked Yates about his biological father. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set, alone for once with all the other children already asleep inside. "Mama told me he left before I was born," Frank said carefully. "That he was not ready to be a father. Is that true?" "That is what she told me," Yates said honestly. "I never met the man. But from what I understand, he made a coward's choice. He ran when things got hard instead of standing by his responsibilities." "Do you think less of me because of him?" Frank asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice that made Yates's chest ache. "Frank, look at me," Yates said firmly, waiting until the boy met his eyes. "You are not your father. You are you. Your blood does not define who you are. Your choices do. And every choice you have made since you were old enough to make them has shown me that you are a good man, honorable and kind. I am proud to call you my son, and I always will be." Frank nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "You are the only father I have ever wanted," he said quietly. "I do not care about the man who left. You stayed. You chose us. That means everything." Yates pulled his son into a tight embrace, and they stayed that way for a long moment while the sky turned orange and pink and finally purple with coming night. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. Felicity and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They fought sometimes, as all couples do, but they always came back together, always chose each other again and again. By 1901, Frank was 20 years old and working alongside Yates on the ranch. Sarah was 12, already showing signs of the beautiful woman she would become. James was 11, Thomas was 9, and Mary was 8. The house that had once seemed so large now felt almost too small for their growing family. Frank fell in love with a girl from town, a sweet-faced blonde named Emma who made him laugh and brought out the best in him. When he asked Yates for permission to marry, Yates gave it gladly, seeing in Frank's eyes the same love he had felt for Felicity all those years ago. The wedding was held in the same little church where Yates and Felicity had married, and watching his son stand at the altar and promise forever to Emma made Yates think about that snowy day when he found a dying woman in a blizzard and carried her home. Everything they had now had started with that single moment, that choice to help rather than pass by, to take a chance on a stranger who needed saving. After the ceremony, Felicity stood beside Yates with tears in her eyes. "Can you believe we have been married 14 years?" she asked. "It feels like yesterday and also like forever all at once." "Best 14 years of my life," Yates said, pulling her close. "Even the hard parts were worth it because I got to go through them with you." "Do you ever regret it?" Felicity asked. "Taking me in that day? Your life would have been so much simpler if you had just left me in the snow." "Simpler does not mean better," Yates said firmly. "I was half dead inside before you came, Felicity. I was breathing, but I was not really living. You brought me back to life. You and Frank and all our children. You gave me a reason to care about the future again. How could I ever regret that?" Felicity smiled up at him through her tears. "I love you more now than I did the day we married," she said. "I did not think that was possible, but it is. Every year I find new reasons to love you." "The feeling is mutual," Yates said, kissing her softly. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and you are still the best thing that ever happened to me." They watched Frank and Emma dance their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by family and friends and community. The little family that had started with 3 people huddled in a cabin during a blizzard had grown into something much larger, much richer. Yates thought about his first wife sometimes, wondered what she would think of the life he had built. He liked to believe she would be happy for him, that she would approve of Felicity and the children and the man he had become. As the years rolled on, Yates and Felicity became grandparents. Frank and Emma had 3 children in quick succession, bringing even more life and laughter into the family. Sarah married a shopkeeper from Castle Dome and had 2 daughters. James went to work for the railroad, seeing parts of the country his parents had never imagined. Thomas stayed on the ranch with Yates, learning everything his father had to teach about horses and cattle and the land. Mary became a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother had once held for herself. By 1910, Yates was 53 years old and Felicity was 45. They had been married for 23 years, had raised 5 children together, and were now enjoying the chaos of grandchildren. Yates's hair had gone completely gray, and his face was lined from years of sun and wind, but Felicity still thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. One evening in late summer, they sat on their porch watching the sunset while their grandchildren played in the yard. It was peaceful and perfect, the kind of moment you want to hold on to forever. "Do you remember the day we met?" Felicity asked, her hand finding Yates's and squeezing gently. "Every detail," Yates said. "I thought you were dead at first. You were so still, so cold. Finding out you were pregnant made me more determined to save you, but I honestly did not think either of you would make it through the night." "And here we are 23 years later," Felicity marveled, "with 5 grown children and 8 grandchildren and a life so full I cannot imagine anything different." "You were right about wanting a big family," Yates said, smiling. "Though I will admit there were times when I wondered if we had lost our minds." "Never," Felicity said firmly. "Not once did I regret any of it. This life we built, it is everything I dreamed of and more. You gave me that, Yates. You gave me a home and a family and a love I did not think was possible." "We gave each other that," Yates corrected. "I was lost before you came. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the stars begin to appear. Their oldest grandchild, Frank and Emma's son Daniel, came running up the porch steps with a firefly cupped in his hands. "Grandpa, look what I caught!" he exclaimed, opening his hands just enough for them to see the insect's glow. "That is a fine specimen," Yates said seriously, giving the boy's discovery the attention it deserved. "Are you going to keep it or let it go?" Daniel considered this carefully. "Let it go," he decided. "It should be free to fly." "That is a good choice," Yates agreed. And they watched together as the boy opened his hands and the firefly drifted up into the darkening sky. After Daniel ran off to rejoin his cousins, Felicity leaned her head on Yates's shoulder. "I hope they remember these evenings," she said softly. "I hope they remember that they were loved and valued, and that family is the most important thing in the world." "They will," Yates assured her, "because we are showing them every single day, just like Frank will show his children, and they will show theirs. We are building something that will last long after we are gone." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Yates's health began to fail in his 60s, the hard life of a ranch hand catching up with him. But he never complained, just kept working as long as he was able, and spent his evenings surrounded by the family he loved. Felicity stayed strong and healthy, caring for Yates when he needed it, and keeping the family together when times got hard. She was the rock they all depended on, the heart of their home, the proof that love could transform even the darkest circumstances into something beautiful. On a cold November evening in 1920, Yates died peacefully in his sleep with Felicity holding his hand. He was 63 years old and had lived a full life, far longer than many men who worked as hard as he did. His children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren gathered for his funeral, sharing stories about the man who had saved a pregnant woman from a blizzard and built a dynasty from that single act of kindness. Felicity grieved deeply but did not break. She had been preparing for this loss for years, knowing that Yates was older and that his body had been worn down by hard work. She missed him terribly, ached for his presence every single day, but she also knew that he would want her to keep living, to keep loving their family, to keep being the strong woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. She lived for another 15 years, watching her family continue to grow and thrive. She told stories about Yates to the younger generations who had never known him, making sure they understood what kind of man their grandfather had been. She kept his memory alive in every way she knew how, honoring the love they had shared by living fully even in his absence. Frank, who had never forgotten that he owed his very existence to Yates's intervention, named his youngest son Yates in honor of the man who had raised him. That boy grew up hearing stories about his namesake, about the cowboy who carried a dying woman through a blizzard and delivered her baby by firelight, about the love that had grown from that desperate moment into something that shaped generations. Felicity died in her sleep in 1935 at the age of 70. Her children buried her next to Yates in the cemetery overlooking Castle Dome, under a simple stone that read, "Beloved wife and mother, she was his miracle in the snow." The family they had built continued long after both of them were gone, spreading across Arizona and beyond, but always remembering where they came from. Every generation told the story of how it all began, of a blizzard and a cowboy and a woman who refused to give up even when death seemed certain. They told it as a love story, which it was, but also as a testament to the power of choosing kindness when it would be easier to walk away, of taking chances on strangers who might become family, of building something lasting from the most unlikely beginnings. Frank lived to be 87 years old, long enough to see his great-great-grandchildren born. On his deathbed, surrounded by the enormous family that had sprung from his birth in a mountain cabin, he told the story one more time. He told them about the blizzard he did not remember but that had shaped his entire life. He told them about Yates, who had chosen to be his father when he did not have to be. He told them about Felicity, who had walked through hell to give him life and then built a heaven on earth for him to grow up in. "That is where we come from," he said to the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around his bed, "from love and sacrifice and second chances, from a moment when everything could have gone wrong but instead went right. Never forget that. Never take for granted the gift that was given to all of us that day in the snow." And they did not forget. The story was passed down through the years, becoming legend, becoming part of the family's identity. They were the descendants of the woman who collapsed in the snow pregnant and alone, and the cowboy who carried her home and delivered her baby. They were the proof that love could grow in the most unlikely places, that families could be built by choice as much as by blood, that sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. The little cabin in the mountains where Frank had been born eventually fell into ruin, reclaimed by the forest, but the house Yates built outside Castle Dome stood for over 100 years, occupied by generation after generation of their descendants. It became a pilgrimage site for family reunions, a place where they gathered to remember their roots and celebrate the love that had started it all. And somewhere in the stars, Yates and Felicity watched over the family they had created, satisfied that their love had not ended with their deaths, but had instead multiplied and grown, touching lives they would never meet, creating ripples that would last forever. They had saved each other in that blizzard long ago, and in doing so had saved hundreds of lives that came after, lives that would not have existed without that single moment of grace. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth remembering, a love worth celebrating for all time. From desperate beginnings had come something beautiful and lasting, proof that even in the darkest winter, spring always comes, bringing new life and new hope and new love to those brave enough to reach for it. The end was just the beginning, as all good endings are, and the love that started in a snowstorm in 1887 continued to burn bright more than a century later, a flame that would never be extinguished, a story that would never be forgotten, a testament to the transformative power of choosing love even when everything else seems impossible.